British Columbia announced that the U.S. government has paused negotiations on the expansive Columbia River Treaty, saying the current administration is reviewing its international engagements.
Water is becoming the dividing line between stability and uncertainty. What makes this moment different is that the shortage is no longer theoretical. The warning signs are visible, measurable, and accelerating, and the choices made now will echo far beyond the next election cycle. Across the western United States, water systems that once felt permanent are under strain. Reservoirs that powered growth for decades are shrinking faster than projections predicted. Rivers that sustained farms, industries, and expanding cities are being pushed beyond their limits. California, Arizona, and Nevada are already operating under strict rationing frameworks, not as a precaution, but as a necessity. These are not temporary measures tied to a bad season. They reflect a deeper shift driven by long-term drought and rising demand. Climate patterns have changed, snowpack levels have declined, and recovery windows have narrowed. In many regions, the margin for error has disappeared. Federal and state agencies continue to revise forecasts, and each update brings more urgency. The Colorado River no longer reaches the sea, a milestone that once seemed impossible. Lake Mead and Lake Powell have fallen to levels that threaten power generation and water delivery for millions. Agricultural land is being taken out of production because irrigation can no longer be guaranteed. Urban planners are preparing for permanent restrictions rather than seasonal ones. The reality is settling in that the systems built during wetter decades cannot support current consumption under present conditions. This growing pressure has forced uncomfortable conversations in Washington. If domestic water supplies continue to decline, where does the country turn next? Conservation efforts help, infrastructure upgrades help, and policy reform helps, but none of these deliver immediate volume at the scale some regions are losing. Attention has increasingly shifted north, toward a country that still holds what many others lack. Canada possesses one of the largest freshwater reserves on the planet, with vast lake systems, powerful rivers, and glacier-fed watersheds that continue to replenish. To certain American policymakers, that abundance looks less like geography and more like an answer waiting to be tapped. That conversation moved into public view when Donald Trump revived the issue with a direct and unsparing message. He argued that the United States needs access to Canadian water as a matter of survival framed as cooperation rather than dependency. His remarks pointed to snowmelt flowing south and described Canada as holding control over an enormous natural supply. The tone suggested practicality rather than confrontation, yet the implication was unmistakable. Water, once treated as a protected national resource, was now being discussed as something that could be shared, redirected, or negotiated under pressure. Ottawa responded without hesitation. Mark Carney made it clear that Canada's water is not for sale, not open to export agreements, and not a bargaining tool in international negotiations. The statement drew a firm boundary and left little room for reinterpretation. This response was not framed as hostility toward the United States, but as a defense of national responsibility. Water, in this view, is not a surplus commodity. It is a foundational asset tied directly to sovereignty, environmental stability, and long-term security. Canada's position is grounded in scale as much as principle. Nearly 20% of the world's surface freshwater lies within its borders. The Great Lakes alone hold enough water to influence continental climate patterns. Northern river systems support ecosystems that stretch thousands of miles. This abundance creates temptation, but it also creates risk. Once water becomes part of trade frameworks, it loses its protected status. Contracts replace stewardship. Market demand replaces ecological limits. Political pressure grows over time rather than fading. History offers clear warnings. When powerful economies gain access to critical resources, withdrawal rarely follows. Agreements expand, expectations harden. What begins as cooperation often becomes obligation. Carney understands that the first deal sets the precedent that shapes every demand that follows. If water is exported during one crisis, future shortages will only increase pressure. Other nations will point to the precedent and seek similar access. In that scenario, scenario, water stops being a public trust and becomes a commodity subject to global competition. South of the border, urgency continues to mount. Climate change has transformed drought from an occasional hardship into a structural condition. Rising temperatures increase evaporation. Reduced snowpack shortens runoff seasons. Population growth intensifies demand in regions least equipped to supply it. These forces compound rather than cancel each other out. As conditions worsen, diplomatic language tends to shift. Requests become expectations. Expectations become entitlements. That trajectory is precisely what Canada is attempting to avoid. Behind closed doors, American lobby groups and private interests are already exploring options. Proposals circulate for large-scale diversion projects that would move water across vast distances. The vision includes pipelines stretching thousands of miles and infrastructure designed to permanently link Canadian watersheds to American consumption. Supporters frame these ideas as feats of engineering and symbols of cooperation. Critics see them as irreversible interventions with consequences no model can fully predict. Large-scale diversion does not simply transfer water from one place to another. It alters ecosystems at the source and along the route. Wildlife patterns shift, soil chemistry changes. Local climates respond in unpredictable ways. Once water is removed from a watershed, recovery is uncertain at best. Lakes do not refill on command. Rivers do not reset after sustained extraction. Collapsed ecosystems do not rebuild on political timelines. These realities weigh heavily in Canadian public opinion. From a Canadian perspective, the danger is not hypothetical. The country has watched other nations struggle after overcommitting natural resources under economic pressure. Short-term relief often leads to long-term instability. Carney has argued consistently that the real solutions to American water stress lie within American borders. Improved management, updated infrastructure, conservation incentives, and realistic planning offer paths forward without shifting ecological burden north. Exporting water does not solve structural imbalance, it relocates it. This is where the divide sharpens. In Washington, refusal can be framed as withholding assistance during crisis. In Ottawa, the request itself is seen as transferring responsibility rather than addressing root causes. Both sides use the language of partnership, yet they define it differently. One emphasizes access, the other emphasizes restraint. Neither position exists in isolation, and neither is likely to soften under rising pressure. While the debate unfolds, Canada is pursuing a different strategy. Rather than monetizing fresh water, significant investment is flowing into protection and resilience. Funds are being directed toward watershed conservation, infrastructure maintenance, climate adaptation, and long-term supply security. The objective is continuity rather than expansion. Ensuring that future generations inherit stability carries more weight than short-term economic opportunity. Carney's message has remained consistent throughout this debate. A nation that loses control of its water loses control of its future. That principle extends beyond borders. As global drought intensifies and populations continue to grow, fresh water will define international power dynamics more than oil or minerals. Countries with surplus will face increasing demands. Countries without will face escalating desperation. In that environment, diplomacy becomes leverage and resources become pressure points. The United States holds immense economic and military influence, but water scarcity introduces a different kind of vulnerability. In this domain, Canada holds something equally powerful: time, stability, and supply. The conflict unfolding is not loud or theatrical. There are no immediate sanctions or public ultimatums. Yet the stakes are immense. Water underpins food production, energy systems, urban survival, and economic continuity. Control over it translates into influence that reaches far beyond national borders. Canada's stance sends a clear signal to the international community. Essential resources will not be traded away for temporary relief elsewhere. That position may be tested as conditions worsen and political pressure grows inside the United States. Future American leaders may push harder. Climate projections may prove optimistic. Public frustration may intensify. Each of these forces will challenge resolve. For now, the position holds. Canada's water remains under Canadian control. This story extends beyond rivers and reservoirs. It speaks to sovereignty in an age of scarcity and whether nations can protect what sustains them when global demand rises. As climate change accelerates, freshwater will only grow in value and importance. Today, the issue remains a discussion. Tomorrow, it may become a demand. And in that future, the choices being made now will matter far more than most realize. Moreover, in other developments, Trump has forced a fundamental rewrite of Canada's trade strategy, turning economic policy into an all-consuming priority across Mark Carney's government. Inside cabinet, trade is no longer confined to a single portfolio or ministry. It has become a shared responsibility, with nearly every senior minister pulled into managing the fallout from Washington's increasingly aggressive use of tariffs, pressure tactics, and economic leverage. The Prime Minister's office is treating the situation as an emergency, not a policy disagreement, because the assumptions that once underpinned Canada's economic relationship with the United States no longer hold. The stakes are enormous. Trade accounts for roughly 2/3 of Canada's economy, and close to 3/4 of Canadian exports still flow to the United States. That relationship